Well, here I am back again with another video glazing this little niche gacha game that isn't even really popular, and also to remind people that I do hold this game in high regard. Today I will just be talking about what in my opinion makes the foundation of Arknights gameplay design so unique and frankly speaking better than any other gacha games. While all these gachas are having one discussions after another with talks about HP inflation, lackluster endgame content, and of course power creep and meta turnovers, Arknights from my experience have managed to keep all these problems under control to a satisfying degree. In this video, I will mainly talk about these 6 points and try to paint a picture on why Arknights is a masterclass in gameplay design, not only in gacha games, but for games in general. All the while trying to entertain you the best I can because oh boy, this is gonna be a long one. Without further ado, let's first talk about operator viability. I expect a lot of you guys who are watching this video is already a fan of Arknights, so I think it is right for me to assume that you would have already known that the community like to express that every operator in the game is viable in some way or another and can be used to clear any of the contents in the game, and I do think this is true. Hell, we have content creators like Dr. Silvergun who only uses 4-star operators, and guide makers such as Ekajin and the GOAT Kyostin V making low-star all-star guides, proving that many of the stages can indeed be cleared without having to use a bunch of 6 stars that players may not have or haven't built yet. But why does these low rarity operators still work and are perfectly viable to use even for the late game stages? Simply put, it is because the low rarity operators are designed in a way that fulfills the most basic requirement to counter enemy and web designs, hence why I like to call them foundational operators. As the term suggests, these operators, especially the 1, 2 and 3 stars, are the foundational design for every other operators in the game. They are the first building blocks of characters you can unlock in the game and serves the purpose of teaching new players the most basic fundamental design that need to be understood about every classes in the game and their branching subclasses. And the early game of Arknights really encourages you to know their kits and play around these foundational operators. The early tutorial stages explains their respective roles and gives the operator for free, so they are the universally available option for every single players to use whether they are a newcomer or seasoned veteran. All these foundational operators and the division of their roles are essentially the core principle in Arknights gameplay design. All operators carry out the roles in their respective classes no matter their rarity or branching subclasses. And because higher rarity operators and their kits are just an expansion on the same concepts as their lower rarity counterparts, low rarity operators can still serve as the common root for all the problem solving needed when playing a stage. If a 6-star operator can fulfill a role in your squad, so does its lower rarity counterpart, albeit at differing levels of ease of use. A shining example of the viability of a lower rarity operator is the operator Myrtle. Looking at her stats, she is definitely outclassed by the higher rarity version of her subclass, Lilac. But a big reason why Myrtle is the most used unit in all of Contingency Contract, one of Arknights' flagship endgame content so far as to be dubbed as the Queen of CC, is because she is a low rarity operator. When comparing to Psylocke, her status as a 6-star operator is actually one of her biggest downside, as 6-star operators are designed to take up much more materials to upgrade compared to a 6-star. Myrtle on the other hand benefits from lower material consumption as part of the design for 4 stars in general, making her much easier to invest in. And to add to this is the design of her first skill, generating a whopping 14 DP per skill activation with a moderately low downtime. Combining all this together shows us that she is the most effective operator at fulfilling her role as a vanguard, which is generating DP for your other operators. Her design is nothing special, but the singular fact that she is the best at doing the most basic requirement of what a vanguard should do means that she can still serve her purpose long after you've built up your roster of characters. Low rarity operators can remain viable even for players with a well-built account because the functionality that they offer does not diminish. Every operator has a long-lasting value, even the foundational operators. With all this said, why lower rarity operators are still seeing uses is also in part because they are easier to acquire and build, so players can make use of Arknights' 12 character slot system. The 12 slot system in Arknights is in my opinion one of the most ingenious design in gacha. You can see that this system is designed to simulate the placement of units in traditional tower defense games, but the system also serves Arknights' design in a story-driven gacha game. The system kind of goes hand in hand in serving the story side as well as the gacha side of Arknights. Story-wise, it doesn't really make sense to have multiple copies of a character to appear on a stage, and in tandem, this allows Hypergryph to create more and more characters for players to gacha and spend their money on. Another prominent point about the 12-slot system is that it presents a lot of leeway and freedom for players to bring whoever they want, creating a sort of situation where players are able to express their own creativity when tackling a stage. The massive size of 12-slot squad in Arknights compared to other gacha games who usually only have like 1/3 or 1/4 of its size allows players to, for example, play with only a class of operators of their own choosing, because the bigger the size of your team, the more that members of that team can help each other out despite the limitation of their class, making what Arknights players call niche knights possible. While in other gacha games, their small slot count means that each slot must provide as much use as it possibly can. This is one of the reasons why Powercreep can become very rampant, as players will often bench a character the moment a newer, stronger, more efficient character is released, as you can only use such a small number of characters at a time, and in-game contents will most likely be designed to be in favor of these newer characters, to nudge players to gacha for them, further perpetuating character turnovers. Arknights, for the most part, has successfully circumvented this problem because in Arknights, the better, more efficient operator is means they can fulfill multiple roles at the same time that will normally be taken up by 2 or even 3 operators, massively downsizing the number of slots needed to clear a stage. This means that more optimal a squad is, the more wiggle room you have to play around with whoever you like, oftentimes being the characters that are technically power crept by others. This results in a situation where you can still bring the most meta unit at a time while not being forced to bench older units, massively minimizing character turnover, because why force yourself to play with only a single character when you can bring more? The singular fact that Arknights lets you bring 12 operators into a stage encourages players to experiment and play according to how they want to play, because there is no single correct team to build. Players are allowed to mix and match units that they want to bring into a stage, whether it is their waifus, husbandos, meta operators, or low and high rarity units. Players can even constrain themselves to a certain archetypes of units, doing randomized unit runs for a bigger challenge like many niche knight players without experiencing too big of a drawback from it. The system also further drives my point about character viability, simply because when players have the freedom to create their own team composition, they can create a team that highlights the utility of any operator in the game, since every operator in the game has the ability to shine given the right setup. Giving this much creative control to the players only works in Arknights because the game has maintained one of the most difficult achievements in a live service gacha game design, that is, maintaining balance between its ever-increasing roster of characters. In other words, Arknights has for the most part successfully avoided power creep. Power creep is the bane of all gacha games. When a newer, better character is released, it does not only make older characters obsolete, but also eventually invalidates all the time saving up enough currencies to gacha for said character, and in some games, the countless hours trying to build up said character. And as I've said before, newer content can oftentimes be designed specifically to match the power level of these newer characters, forcing players to roll for these newer units just so they can catch up with its difficulty, and in turn further driving older units into obsolescence. Arknights also do suffer from power creep. The newer 6 stars in our year 2025 does not only have a higher damage output, but also offers a lot more versatility than previous 6-star operators. These are clear cases of power creep, but for the majority of Arknights players, they seem to be handling this power creep just fine. This, in my opinion, is because newer operators are not only stronger, but they also does not remove the viability of older operators. Each new addition to your roster of characters expands the game's strategic vocabulary, introducing fresh new mechanics to play around with without undermining the kits of older units. New operators do not replace the old, but instead just an additional option on how you can approach a stage. For example, Logos is definitely a power creep of Aya Fiala, but they both can still coexist alongside each other. For other operators, they still remain not being power creep by virtue of having a niche that is not present in the kits of other operators, not necessarily because they deal an absurd amount of damage. This is the secret of how Powercreep in Arknights manages to not be a controversial issue in the game. Arknights has balanced itself on mechanical variety instead of numerical escalation. More characters gives you more ways to be creative, not just more power to brute force all the content. And because of that, Arknights manages to be both balanced and ever evolving, a system where all the operators still have a place in the modding content and new ones only serve to enhance your options rather than constricting it. Now I really want to pause for a little bit and talk about the character progression in Arknights. I have seen some people talk about how long it is to grind and acquire the necessary resources to fully build a single 6-star operator and how expensive they can be. I didn't really say this in my previous video about why people don't want to play Arknights, but another point that I've heard from friends whom I've recommended the game to is that the game doesn't really let them invest into their favorite 6-star operator in the early game and instead forces them to use lower rarity units that they don't really seem to enjoy. And that is precisely the point of why 6-star operators are hard to invest into in the first place. The game is designed to make players understand the basic mechanics of the game by making the lower rarity units cheaper to build, easier to acquire, and most importantly being designed with a simpler kit. And because of limited resources, you have to use them whether you like it or not. The operators you have in the early game is there to slowly trickle down the game mechanic to the players and keeps them on a steady learning curve at the cost of having to slog through using not so premium characters. I think this tendency to put a lot of materials into a single premium character, funnily enough, comes from other gacha games where again the limitation of a small number of slots to use means materials will naturally be funneled into 1 or 2 characters that a player is currently building. This is what it means when we say vertical progression, by hitting milestones for a character to make them stronger by fulfilling their material requirement. The early game experience for these gacha games can usually be breezed through by gathering all the materials you can and heavily investing on a select few characters, with them most likely being a higher rarity unit. Because why waste many materials on a 4-star when I can just make 1 or 2 busted 5-star characters? Whereas in Arknights, early game materials are harder to come by, and this is further exacerbated by the game's redundant design of locking material stages onto certain days. Add to this the fact that you require a lot more units to clear a stage thanks to the design of the game's stages. In a typical stage in Arknights, enemies might come from multiple spawn points and making their way onto different points of players needs to defend. Along the way, there might be multiple choke points that this player can utilize. What this means is that your team will naturally be compartmentalized into different points of interest that each needs to be guarded by 1 or more operators. So in the end, you need to invest in quite a few characters to cover all the possible map variations Arknights has to offer. In this case, there is a clear emphasis on horizontal progression, where players need to have as much option as possible available at hand to tackle challenges that may come ahead. But with materials being as scarce as they are, it is not economically viable to invest in a single 6-star when their individual progression milestones are very demanding. So it makes sense to instead invest into 3 and 4 stars as their progression milestones are much cheaper. This base squad that you have will be there to clear most of the in-game content while you gradually build more and more operators going up in their rarity until you can E2 your chosen 6-star operator. Another point I want to mention is one that's brought up by Psyche in his video about Arknights, where he mentions that
the amount of grind and time you have to spend to max out one operative should be roughly around the same as getting a full set of viable artifacts in Genshin.
While maxing out an operator, which I think he's talking about a 6-star, will take a long time, this is only true during the early game of Arknights, which to his credit he is still experiencing. The typical progression flow in Arknights is using the early game team to accrue more materials to build more powerful units, moving bit by bit until you have a squad that you are comfortable with using or a full team of 6-star operators. In the end, most players will stick to a single team and maybe a few other operators to swap around with, while accruing greater and greater amount of materials, leading to a substantial supplies of these resources. Using these resources, players can just level up a character immediately after acquiring them. This is completely antithetical to modern gacha design that favors RNG gearing system be included in their character progression. RNG gear system is everything that I hate about character progression in games like Wuthering Waves, simply because it is just an endless time sinker. Hypothetically speaking, you can never really finish building a character when RNG relics are involved, because there will always be a mythical better stat than what you currently have. There is no true ceiling on the progression milestone, and you can always pour an exorbitant amount of materials into a unit and pray to RNGesus to not set you back after grinding resources for hours on end. On a similar note, grinding for relics are not content. Anyone who says that are just coping, and it shows the direness of the endgame content. Ultimately, progression in Arknights isn't just about getting the best stats, but also about expanding your options and what they are capable of. And the best way Arknights demonstrates this is through its stage and enemy design. The stages and enemy designs in Arknights is the part where all of the things I've talked about before really tells itself together. Each stages in the game never truly feels the same, because there is so much factor in a stage that can be tweaked around and changed, whether it is the number of enemies, types of enemies and their mechanics, the landscape of the stage itself, specific tiles, and even the event mechanics. Each of them is a piece of puzzle that forces you to think about how you use your operators and not just which one of them you are using. As such, the game can present a near unlimited set of challenges to the players. The game rarely ever gives you a correct answer to clear them. Instead, it presents a set of problems and lets you decide on how to solve them. This is part of the game's design that leans itself more towards horizontal progression. Arknights manages to avoid rampant power creep and maintain all the units' viability by changing the game mechanically, and in part changing the game experience in each event, all the while avoiding the problem of overwhelming a new player with all of its intricate mechanics by dividing all of them into specific events. The early main story chapters, for example, is there to teach the core of the gameplay, and when a new player is confident enough, they can choose to play and expose themselves to a new set of mechanics in other events, and slowly adapt to each features the game has to offer. The result is that the game experience can become very personal. Each player plays the game a little differently. Some may play the game casually, some may focus on the side events rather than the main story, while others impose restrictions onto themselves to add another layer of difficulty to the game. This level of expressiveness is something that I've rarely seen in other gacha games. It allows for a constant change in how you play without invalidating the older units. This is the reason why launch operators such as Gumi and Ifrit are still widely used even till this day. This constant reinvention is what allows Arknights endgame content to thrive without ever feeling monotonous. I want to preface this part by saying that in my previous video where I say who is to say that Genshin Impact did not indirectly contribute to Hypergryph developing some of our favorite game modes in Arknights, such as contingency contracts and integrated strategies. Well, that was apparently untrue, and the game modes were released way before Genshin ever came out. It is clear Hypergryph already has at least an idea of where they want to go with the game. So yeah, I was a dumbass and forgot to fact check my statements there. I'm truly sorry for that, okay? Anyway, Arknights endgame content is built around a cycle of content rotation, keeping the game challenging, rewarding, and most importantly keeps its live service nature sustainable. The prime example of this is the contingency contract, a recurring event that lets players scale the difficulty by stacking risk modifiers. Rather than giving you one static challenge, it lets you customize it to your own desire, choosing the conditions you want like stronger enemies, fewer deployment slots, banning certain type of units, and increasing their costs. This combination of all the above is what makes this game mode very memorable. It is a test of mastery that rewards knowledge, adaptability, and creativity. Well, most of the time anyway. Then there is the roguelike mode integrated strategies. As with most endgame content, IS was initially designed because content consumption was outpacing production, and Arknights needed a game mode that could be played during its content run. Integrated Strategies aims to bring a genuine fun to the players, not only as a tool to drive daily engagement. Thus, the first iteration of it, Kyobe's Fungimis, was released. This game mode was very positively received as it transforms Arknights' tactical depth into a dynamic, run-based experience that perfectly blends itself to Arknights' tower defense genre, as its gameplay naturally offers a vast strategic depth. The core design of integrated strategies is what truly sets itself apart from other roguelike modes in other gacha games. Arknights game designer Da Huang mentions in an interview that IS's design rests on a synergy between three design aspects. Number 1, the ability to create unique strategies according to different squads and available relics to create emergent complexity. Number 2, hope and recruitment system forcing players to adapt their playstyle on the go and building their strategy based on what is offered. And number 3, conforming to players' intuition so as to not disconnect players from already established habits. With the success of Fungimis, Hypergryph would later release Phantom and the Crimson Solitaire as the first permanent integrated strategies. However, this will not be the end of IS, as the team behind it has cracked the code on making IS a mainstay feature of Arknights. William, the lead designer of IS, says this in the same interview. I studied permanent gameplay modes in other games and found a common flaw in designs players criticize as bloated. They stopped updating. The essence of permanence lies in continuous evolution. If we stuck with the initial design, we would inevitably die. To provide sustainability towards IS, William devised a 3-tier framework for updating IS. Number 1, launching a new season every year with overhauls towards its systems. And number 2, releasing DLC expansions complete with new endings, environmental effects, and mechanics every few months. And lastly, providing monthly operators and rewards together with lore tidbits related to the IS's theme. The constant monthly, quarterly, and annual updates keeps IS from becoming stale, and this is a big factor as to why this game mode has become a favorite by many. Additionally, the permanence of previous IS iterations and them not offering any gacha currency as rewards are also an imperative design decision towards IS's success. This way, any form of FOMO is eliminated and players get to focus themselves on fully experiencing the joy in its gameplay design, a seemingly rare occurrence in live service games. At its core, Arknights is a game that respects its players. The game doesn't try to overwhelm you with bloated systems or endless grind. It gives you clear rules, thoughtful limitations, and then trusts you to be creative within them. Each system I've mentioned in the video supports each other in a delicate balance that rewards your understanding of the game. With how all the operators are still viable, the flexibility given by its 12-slot system, the way it avoids having severe power creep, the linear character progression, and how each stage and enemy offers unique challenges, and how the endgame content is designed to give endless replayability. And this is why even years after its release, Arknights still stands as a true masterclass in game design. Hey everyone, this is Skybird here. Just want to say thank you to everybody who watches this video. I know this is a bit of a long one and I was supposed to upload this video before Exalted releases, but alas I have gotten pretty busy about some IRL stuff, so sorry for the late upload. Anyway, speaking of the new event, I will be doing my first ever stream, doing polls, finishing the stages and whatnot, and if everything goes well, I will be doing it on the 18th of October, around 3 hours or so after the daily reset. So once again, thank you for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you think I deserve it, and this has been Skybird signing off.